And in the end, it's no deal, at least not this time. Negotiators with Iran bargaining up to the wire over Tehran's nuclear program. In the end, they opted for a 7-month extension. We'll see why and ask if the window of opportunity has passed. When he wasn't horse trading with his Iranian counterpart this past weekend, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was busy reassuring his Saudi and Israeli allies. What happens, though, come January when a hostile Republican majority takes over the U.S. Senate? Will the U.S. be in the same position to bargain? Similarly, Iran's supreme leader has been keeping hardliners on a tighter leash of late. But if there's no prospect for the easing of the West's crippling sanctions, what happens then? Later, we'll be showing you an exclusive report on daily life in Tehran under sanctions. And if hardliners on both sides win the day and the talks get bogged down for good, how will Iran and its rivals react? Could a new nuclear arms race be in the cards? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the extension of the deadline on a nuclear deal with Iran. With us from the talks in Vienna, France 24 Sanam Chantier will be joining us. From Washington, Georgetown University's Matthew Kronig, author of A Time to Attack Iran. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be on the show, and the title is A Time to Attack the Looming Iranian Nuclear Threat. A little more.
Okay, A Time to Attack the Looming Iranian Threat. With us as well, attorney and author Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to Didier Chaudet of the Institute for Perspective and Security Studies in Europe. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter our hashtag F24debate. Just moments ago, Iran's president speaking, a nuclear deal will be done. Those are the words of Hassan Rouhani. This after that decision to push back the deadline for a final deal until July.
It is true that during these talks, we have not reached a final conclusion. However, I can announce to you that in order to meet this objective, we have managed to take steps forward. And compared with the situation of 3 months ago, there's a major difference, and an even greater difference with what was the situation 6 months ago.
All right, a big difference between 3 and 6 months ago. Let's cross to Vienna and France 24 Sanam Chantier. Sanam, Hassan Rouhani also saying that most gaps on a deal have been removed, and again saying that there will be a deal. Is that the kind of noises you're hearing?
We're hearing very mixed noises here in Vienna, Francois. Iranian official told me earlier that they felt like there was a dramatic change in the stance of the Western diplomats on Sunday, which is yesterday. Apparently in the morning they were still discussing an agreement, and then by the evening they started talking about an extension. So they themselves seem rather confused, but what we can't deny is the fact that there is naturally some disappointment. And I think this is why the president had to come on state TV and address this issue and actually try and dress it up a little bit. He said that there will be a nuclear agreement at some point, and that's what he needs to feed the hardliners who have been opposing any nuclear dealings with the West. We also had some words from the representative of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is related to the supreme leader who has the last say on any nuclear agreement that's made with the West, and he said that this is actually the loss for the West, not for us. So they're trying to dress this up, I feel.
Trying to dress it up. The negotiators in Vienna also trying to perhaps talk up prospects after failing to meet their deadline, talking them up to a point. Let's listen to the U.S. Secretary of State.
These talks aren't going to suddenly get easier just because we extend them. They're tough. And they've been tough, and they're going to stay tough. If it were easier, if views on both sides weren't as deeply held as they are, then we'd have reached a final agreement months or even years ago.
Sanam Chantier, what's that big sticking point that's keeping the two sides from striking a deal?
Kerry made it very clear that he's not going to talk about where they're at with the negotiations. What he tried to do is exactly in line with what the Iranians did. They are trying to assure, especially because we have a February deadline in a way to look at. We've got what will be a Republican-led conference who's from the very beginning been opposed to any kind of dealings with Iran. So I feel like both sides are trying to assure the hardliners and hawks in their respective countries, both in Tehran and in Washington. But at no point did they say to us what the sticking points are. What Kerry did was also what we had a statement from the IAEA earlier, and they're saying that so far Iran has in fact been in compliance. So there's no actual concrete reason as to why this wasn't reached. But what we know is that stances were changed. We don't know exactly on what points.
All right, we're going to try to suss out some of those points now with our panel. Let me begin with you, Didier Chaudet. For you, what's the major hurdle?
Well, from an Iranian point of view, you will want to know at some point when the sanctions will go away and go away for good. We should remember how it has been hurtful for the Iranian people to be under those sanctions. Since the beginning of the sanctions, Iran lost 150 billion euros. How the economy is hurt, how the average people is hurt, is something that we often forget. And if you put yourself in the shoes of an Iranian leader, you need to bring something better in terms of economics and in terms of protection of your own nation.
And from the West, what's the major sticking?
From the West, it seems that from what we can hear from a few sources, it is all about the question of a centrifuge and the fact that deep down, quite a few people in the West do not want to trust Iran. We come back also to this notion of trust. The way we see the other is actually a big deal. If you cannot accept the fact that at some point we will need to look at the Iranians and to be confident in them following their word, we will continue to have problems and not able to find a deal with them.
Matthew Kronig, the initial reactions coming in now from Capitol Hill, Republican senators saying Iran's nuclear talks extension should include requirements that for the final deal be approved by the U.S. Congress and also should be accompanied by tougher sanctions in the interim. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And just to comment on the sticking point, I think the sticking point is very clear. Iran has built this nuclear weapons threshold capability. According to Secretary Kerry, Iran is 2 to 3 months away from being able to break out and having an irreversible capability. And so the international community's goal is very clear, to get Iran to roll back that capability. And Iran's leaders have been unwilling to do that. They've been unwilling to budge on numbers of centrifuges, unwilling to give us the reassurance we need. And so we're prepared to lift sanctions if Iran makes those concessions. And so that's really what we need to do to solve this, is to get Iran to make the necessary concessions on its nuclear program, and it's unwilling to do that. So I don't think the window of opportunity, to answer your question, I don't think the window for opportunity has passed on negotiations, but I think the window for opportunity for this strategy has passed.
And you think that nuclear talks should be coupled with increased sanctions?
Yeah, so the problem to this point hasn't been insufficient time. The negotiators have had an entire year. The negotiations are detailed, but not that detailed. It doesn't take a year. So buying another 7 months doesn't change anything. The problem so far is that, again, Iran is unwilling to make the concessions. So what's needed is some way to increase the pressure on Iran. And so I don't think that the solution is to slap immediate sanctions on Iran. I think there are some problems with that approach. But I do think the administration and the U.S. Congress should make it clear that this July 1st deadline is a hard deadline. There will be no extensions beyond that. And if we fail to reach a comprehensive deal by July 1st, then tougher sanctions on oil and gas and on the banking sector will be imposed.
Ardavan Amir Aslani?
Honestly speaking, ever since this entire Iranian nuclear issue popped up in the press, I've been hearing that Iran is 2 months away from the nuclear threshold status. And I've been hearing this for the last 12 years. I don't think that new sanctions will change anything. I mean, I've been hearing talk about sanctioning Iran's oil and gas industry. They're already under sanctions. Iran can't export its oil. It was just mentioned by Professor Chaudé that Iran lost $150 billion in lost income from its lack of oil exports. The Iranian banking system is totally locked out from the international financial community. What do you want to do? Bomb the civilian population of Iran? I think that at the end of the day, we should look at this matter from the point of view of both parties. Both parties are condemned to reach an agreement. Of course, it's about providing security to the international community as to Iran's genuine intentions on the nuclear issue. Of course, it's about saving the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But it's also about taking back into consideration the destiny of 80 million people in Iran who've been put in a state of total exile for the last 35 years. Right. These sanctions go back 35 years.
Analysts who say the West don't feel like the Iranians have been showing enough disclosure when it comes to their nuclear program.
I heard in your own show that the IAEA feels that Iran has been compliant. Aside from the gobbledygook that we're hearing, nobody has managed to come up with any tangible proof that Iran has actually gone for the militarization of a nuclear weapon. We're not there yet. And the issue, as it was rightly mentioned by Professor Chaudé, is that both parties lack confidence in each other. The Iranians, when they look at the U.S., they look at the U.S. with a great degree of suspicion. I mean, this is a country that since 1953 has been the subject of U.S. aggression. Iranians, when they talk about the U.S., they think about the overthrow of the only democratically elected government in Iranian history, that of Dr. Mossadegh, up to today's date, when the entire nation has been sanctioned for 35 years. And the Americans have their own agenda. It was rightly mentioned, there are issues out there, and there are also people of concern in both capitals, both in Tehran and in D.C., who have a vested interest for there to be no deal at all. We heard today Netanyahu coming out and saying, God bless, there is no deal. A no deal is better than a bad deal. For Netanyahu, any deal with Iran is a bad deal. And you also have in D.C. all the pro-Israel lobby people, all the pro-Saudi wallet diplomacy people, as well as in Iran, all the pro-guards people, all those who are profiting from the sanctions economically that are hostile to this deal. But at the end of the day, as the Iranian president seems to mention, there will be a deal, and this deal is unavoidable.
Was he getting ahead of himself, Hassan Rouhani, when he says there will be a deal? He said it in the affirmative tense.
No, I think that the progress made is substantial. We don't know exactly what kind of progress they're talking about because the discussions are confidential. But I think he's dead serious because he needs to prove to his own electorate that he's doing something to improve the daily life of Iranians. And this can only come if there's a nuclear deal, when sanctions are removed, when Iranians will get their chance of returning back to the international society.
All right, a lot of reactions coming in. One suspicious of Tehran. Iran is playing with time. And once the moderate government is out, things will be more complex. Didier Chaudé, has the window of opportunity passed?
I don't think so. I am confident with the fact that if Rouhani is saying what he is saying, it is for good reason. As it has been said, he needs this deal. If he finds himself with no deal at all, there will be more pressure coming from the US. And for him, it will be the end of his government. It will be even the end of his political career. He doesn't want to be a second Khatami. He wants to be somebody who matters in Iranian politics. And for that, he needs this deal, and he needs to find some sort of compromise about the sanctions.
Matthew Koenig, on the Sunday morning talk show in the U.S., Barack Obama saying that come what may, he's going to sell his plan to Congress. Now, we've been talking a lot about the guns drawn between a Republican-led Congress and the White House these days. Can he sell something in the end to Congress, or is it mission impossible?
No, I think he can definitely sell something to Congress. It would just have to be a good deal. As the Obama administration has said many times, a bad deal is worse than no deal. So the United States, the P5+1, is not willing to settle on a bad deal. But if the administration gets a good deal, Congress would support that. So I don't think the question here is whether the United States supports a diplomatic solution. There's bipartisan support for a diplomatic solution to this. The question is, what would be a good enough deal? And my understanding is that the P5+1 has been remarkably clear and consistent for the past year about what Iran needs to do to reassure the international community that its program cannot be used to build a weapon, and Iran has been unwilling to make those concessions. So I think Hassan Rouhani and his government, Foreign Minister Zarif, I believe that they actually do very much want a deal, and that maybe explains their optimism. The sticking point is that they're not the decision makers. The supreme leader in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini is the decision maker, and so far he's been unwilling to accept these curbs on this nuclear weapons threshold capability.
So far unwilling, you say, but we heard most notably the German and the French foreign ministers saying that they'd received new proposals in the last 48 hours. What could those new proposals be, Matthew?
Well, the major sticking points have been on Iran's enrichment capability. Iran currently has 19,000 centrifuges in place. The P5+1, this group of international powers, has been requesting that Iran reduce that capability to about 3,000 centrifuges. Meanwhile, Iran says that it won't dismantle a single centrifuge and has even talked about expanding that capability up to 50,000 centrifuges. So that's the major point of contention. I don't know about these recent proposals, but it's possible that Iran is willing to finally dismantle some centrifuges. That's what it's going to take to get a deal. But there are other sticking points as well related to the IAEA's concerns about Iran's past military dimensions to the program, about this nuclear reactor at Iraq. And on the Iranian side, they want the sanctions relief, as some of your guests have pointed out. So there are disputes between the two sides about when the sanctions relief will come into place, whether it will be all up front or be stepped in over time. And then there are also disagreements
and
about
in your
the
opinion, when should sanctions relief begin?
Well, I think that what the P5+1 is pursuing is something that they're calling snapback sanctions. So rather than completely lift all of the sanctions architecture that we've worked so hard over the past 10 years to put in place immediately, what we would do is suspend sanctions as long as Iran is abiding by the terms of the deal. But if Iran were to cheat on that agreement, the sanctions would snap back into place. And I think that's necessary because we need to retain some leverage. The sanctions are our only point of leverage, so if we suspend them all immediately at the beginning of a deal, Iran has no incentive to comply with that deal.
Artavan, if there were no sanctions, Iran wouldn't be at the table, would they?
That's a probability. And I presume that as time goes by, it will be a step-by-step approach to the Iranian nuclear issue. I don't think that there will be a one-off shot removal of the sanctions. However, the climate has changed globally. It is true that as time goes by, the Republicans in the United States Congress may feel much more comfortable in opposing their hostility to the Obama policy in relation to Iran. Although all of the U.S. sanctions voted by Congress contain in them waiver clauses specifically authorizing the United States President to either on a case-by-case basis or generally waive the application of the sanctions. And today, as we saw on the immigration issue in the U.S., the President has an extensive approach as to the extent of his powers. He has a tendency to consider that through executive orders, he can basically handle the vast majority of issues that he is confronted with. But also, the geopolitics and dynamics of the region has changed. When the Iranians are going to that table, it is true oil prices have gone down, thank you Saudi Arabia. But also, what is certain is that the Russians have embarked upon Cold War II, despite the declarations of Putin, and they're willing to reach a side with the Iranians. So are the Chinese. So it's not as if Iran is totally alone out there, ready to be dominated and crushed by the Americans.
We're going to look at that context when we come back. Before we go to the break, a tweet put out by French Senator Nathalie Goulet. It would have been a pity to close the door after such tremendous work, she says. A waste of time and hope for the Iranian population. We're going to see what life is like these days in Tehran when we come back. It's the France 24 debate.